slow up. No, I don't take shit, I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up.
Welcome back, friends. I'm Rogue, and in today's Lord of the Rings Online Beginner Guide, we are going to be talking about the Burglar. But before we get started, I wanted to say thank you to everyone who has been patiently awaiting my return to YouTube due to my last computer kicking the bucket. You guys are the best. As always, my intention with these beginner guides is to not only showcase an amazing class of Lotro, but to help new or returning players decide if a class may be for them. Alright, let's get after it. The Burglar is described as a master of debuffing, utilizing skills to confound their foes and waylay unsuspecting enemies via stealthy ambushes. In a fellowship, the Burglar acts as a support role by dealing respectable damage and sabotaging stronger enemies with debuffs. If the hunter is Lotros' assassin, then the Burglar is the crafty scout, able to pick and choose their fights using stealth and guile. But before we can go a-burgling, we need a hero, and everybody barring the Beorning and the regular dwarf is applicable to become the Burglar. As always, selecting a race is a flavor choice, and I recommend that you choose the race that best suits your heroic aesthetics. Forget the metaplay, guys, and focus on the fun to play. Alright, let's dive into what the Burglar receives at first level. Surprise Attack is a fast melee attack that deals common main hand damage to a single target and deals additional damage if landed from behind your foes. This skill also deals higher critical damage than other skills, and sits on a 10-second cooldown, and costs 1 power. Cunning Attack is another fast single-target melee strike that deals common main hand damage, but also applies a bleed to the target that ticks every 2 seconds for 8 seconds, but also deals more bleed damage to the target if used from stealth, and rests on a 6-second cooldown at the cost of 1 power. Subtle Stab is a single-target melee strike that deals common main hand damage at the cost of 1 power and sits on a speedy cooldown of 2.5 seconds. This skill acts as the primary spammable attack for the low-level Burglar. Be sure to place this skill on a hotkey that you like touching. And finally, Sneak. This is a pretty self-explanatory skill, but it places your hero into a stealth mode, increasing your stealth detection and adding 100% surprise strike and cunning attack critical chance. Sneak is a toggled skill, meaning that it is active and deactivated at your leisure, but enemies can break that state if you wander too close or directly in front of them. Sneak has a power cost of 1 and sits on a 10-second cooldown. Now, there isn't a best-in-slot way to burgle at level 1, so just sneak and stab your way to level 2 where you will gain access to your class specialization and some new tricks. At 2nd level, we gain the skill Double-Edged Strike, which is a dual attack that deals both main and offhand damage to up to 3 targets but requires a critical strike to become available for use. It costs 1 power and sits on a 5-second cooldown. Also, upon obtaining level 2, you are allowed to choose a class specialization, and for beginners I recommend the blue line, which relies on damage over time and restoring morale or hit points through damage. For selecting the blue line, we gain access to 2 new skills and 1 trait point to spend in the blue line class tree. Hedge Your Bet is a single-target melee strike that deals common main hand damage and applies a green gamble to the target, restoring morale or hit points upon dealing damage to the affected foe, at the cost of 2 power and sits on a 7-second cooldown. This skill should be used in every fight. And Lucky Strike, a single-target melee attack that deals common main hand damage, but can only be activated after using the Double-Edged Strike skill, at the cost of 2 power and sits on a 15-second cooldown. As for your starting trait points, place them into Stick and Move, increasing your overall evasion chance. This will come into play later as we gain levels, but for now it's just an additional % chance to avoid damage altogether. With class specializations unlocked, you can now access your Virtue panel. Be sure to select Determination due to it increasing your maximum agility, and agility being the primary stat for the Burglar hero. This is the best in slot Virtue in my opinion. Okay, let's get some levels and see if we can work out a rotation for the low-level Burglar. For now, I would ignore both Double-Edged Strike and Lucky Strike, and only rely on them when and if they become available in a fight. For now, focus on attacking from stealth when possible, leading with Surprise Strike or Cunning Attack due to the 100% crit chance from stealth. Always apply Hedge Your Bet to every enemy so that you're gaining morale while dealing damage, and spam Subtle Stab to clear out weaker enemies. Okay, let's get after it. By 6th level, you will have placed your 5th point into the blue line skill Stick and Move, granting a passive plus 5% additional evasion chance and unlocking the Bob and Weave passive ability, which grants the Burglar a heal over time that ticks every 3 seconds for 12 seconds upon evading an attack and can only be triggered every 5 seconds. Pair this with Hedge Your Bet, and we now have some sustainability when tackling more difficult foes or small group combat. At 7th level, we gain the Fine Footing skill, which quickly recovers from being dazed, stunned, or knocked down and doesn't break stealth upon use at the cost of 4 power, but sits on a 1-minute cooldown. Also at 7th level, we now have access to the blue line skill, Gambler's Advantage. This is a critical hit chain skill, meaning it requires a critical hit to activate, but it deals strong light main hand damage and places a good bleed on the target that ticks every 2 seconds for 20 seconds and sits on a 5-second cooldown. This skill is great for melting bosses for the low-level Burglar and should be your go-to attack whenever you score a critical hit in the heat of battle. Upon reaching 8th level, we gain access to the Riddle skill, a 20-meter range daze attack that has a 100% break chance upon dealing damage to the target and lasts for 30 seconds, and sits on a 1-minute cooldown. This skill is handy for small group pulling, but the lengthy cooldown does set the skill on the back burner for how often it can be utilized. At 10th level, we gain the Touch and Go skill. This is a self-heal that restores 50% of the Burglar's maximum morale and increases our evade chance as well as both physical and tactical mitigation for 15 seconds, but does sit on a hefty 5-minute cooldown. This is a low-level Burglar's oh shit button. Keep this bad boy in reserve for situations where you're becoming overwhelmed while soloing, or if you accidentally pull aggro while in group content. Also at level 10, the Burglar gains the Throw Knife skill, which is little more than a 30-meter range single target attack on a 4-second cooldown. It's good for pulling or looking edgy while finishing off a fleeing target. It is also around this level that I recommend pursuing Slayer deeds to snag up your first virtue, and as stated before, the Determination virtue is where your virtue journey should begin, due to agility being the primary stat for the Burglar hero. A good place to begin this is at Radlaw, where you can kill bandits in droves. Beyond this, your chosen virtues are up to you, though evasion, critical chance, and combat mastery should be your goals to trim out your Burglar. It is also worth mentioning that the main story of Swan Fleet also provides virtue experience, but at much smaller increments. But if deed grinding isn't your thing, this is a fine alternative, but much slower. Okay, rotation time. As a Burglar, your greatest asset is stealth, so it's optimal to begin any engagement from the shadows. The Burglar has the advantage that you are allowed to pick your battles more tactically than other classes due to your shadowy nature. If a situation looks too dicey, you have the option to just move on and seek out easier prey. But this is not always the case. On the occasions that you are forced to fight or it's a quest-related enemy, try to engage from stealth first if possible. Lead with Cunning Attack. I prefer this over Surprise Strike due to the bleed effect. Follow with Hedge Your Bet to deal light damage and allow you and allies to regenerate morale from the target while dealing damage. Then Subtle Stab and Surprise Strike your way to victory. Utilize Riddle to crowd control a single enemy if necessary, and if you score a critical hit, Gambler's Advantage should be your go-to crit chain ability due to its solid damage and 20-second bleed. And finally, reserve Touch and Go if you start to become overwhelmed. Now this is not a surefire way to victory, but you will be surprised just how easy it is to stay in the fight as a Burglar. Hedge Your Bet and Bob and Weave stack for the purpose of incoming healing, giving us great sustain and stay in the fight power. Okay, let's Bob and Weave our way to 20, shall we? At 12th level, we gain Exploit Opening, a single target melee stun that deals light main hand damage and stuns the target for 5 seconds, and begins a fellowship maneuver and sits on a lengthy 2-minute cooldown. Upon reaching 14th level, we gain 2 new skills. Addle, a 20-meter range debuff that interrupts inductions or casting time, and places a debuff on the target that increases their induction time by 25% for 30 seconds and sits on a 10-second cooldown. This is a great skill for dealing with enemy spellcasters. And Burgle. I mean, it wouldn't really be a thief class if you couldn't steal. And I'm going to be honest here, my first Burgle attempt looted an earring from an unsuspecting Uruk, when I was expecting just a handful of copper. I'm not sure how deep the rabbit hole goes with this skill, but with only 20-second cooldown, be sure to lighten some pockets during your adventures. At 16th level, we snag up Cure Poison, a 2-second induction skill that removes 1 poison effect with a maximum strength of 18 from you or your target at the cost of 2 power and sits on a 1-minute cooldown. This skill is great for keeping the enemy STDs off your fellowship. Jumping forward to 18th level, we gain 2 new skills. Safe Fall allows the Burglar to avoid injuries from falling short of a death fall from a great height, but breaks stealth upon activation and rests on a 10-second cooldown. This is a niche skill and won't get a lot of use apart from cliffside parkour, I suppose. And diversion, a 20-meter range debuff that turns an enemy away from the burglar while stealth, leaving their back exposed for good old Mr. Dagger for 10 seconds and sits on a 20-second cooldown. It's a decent setup skill, allowing you to move in for that initial critical attack. And finally, at 20th level, we gain 2 more skills. Purge Corruption is a single target melee attack that deals good common main hand damage and removes 1 corruption effect from your target and sits on a speedy cooldown of 5 seconds, good for slapping a buff off a tougher enemy. And Track Treasure, a toggle skill that locates nearby treasure chests and valuable containers. This is a nice skill to keep loose change in your pocket. Okay, let's talk about the blue line build for the low level burglar. I began with 5 points into stick and move to increase my evasion chance to activate the bob and weave passive, which offers good sustain as you are engaged in combat. Then 1 point into gambler's advantage. This is a great damage over time bleed and also deals solid initial main hand damage. From there, I spent 4 points into honed wit to increase the damage over time abilities of the burglar, directly affecting gambler's advantage and cunning attack. Then I maxed Swift and Subtle to increase the healing capabilities of Bob and Weave by 50%, making our burglar that much harder to kill. Stepping down a tier to Aggravated Bleeds to increase all bleed pulses by 2. Then back up to place a 5th point into Honed Wit, granting a total of plus 25% to our bleed skills. The last point I spent on Double Down to apply a debilitating gamble when using the diversion skill. The burglar is a slow starter for the classes of Lotro, but gains speed quickly, and I can easily say deals fantastic single target damage with strong sustain and packs a great deal of player agency when it comes to how you want to tackle content. I really enjoyed leveling and streaming this class the past couple of weeks, and if you are new to Lotro or looking for a classic rogue type character, then the burglar will not disappoint. This will be the last beginner's guide for Lord of the Rings Online on my channel. And I can honestly say that although leveling every class to 20 felt like a chore at times, I have truly enjoyed exploring the early levels of the classes of Lotro. As for what comes next, you're just going to have to wait and see. Well, as always, my friends, thank you so much for your time. If you enjoyed the video, shank that like button to bleed the algorithm and consider subscribing for more RPG stuff. And have an amazing day. Goodbye.